Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome. Let's check the sound real quick. Welcome. Alright, that sounds like me. How's it going? How was your weekend? Welcome to our first podcast, streamcast, talk show type thing here on the channel. Um, we're gonna jump into it in a minute. First, I'm gonna jump into Discord to talk to the guys who are joining me. Alright, we're on. Hi
Hello?
guys.
Hello.
So we got in Discord with us today. We got one of my guildies from Classic WoW, Rascal, and y'all know Wicked Tricks. Um, we're going to be talking about cryptids today. Both cryptids local to us and some of our favorite cryptids, and of course answering any questions or talking about anything you guys bring up in the chat and all that good shit. Um, First, we'll get to know a little bit our guests. Uh, Wicked Tricks, everybody knows you for the most part. But what we'll at least tell them what kind of piques your interest about cryptids. What makes them interesting to you? Are you a believer, a skeptic, somewhere in the middle, etc.?
Well, I mean, it started back when I was in high school. I had an experience with I guess Bigfoot.
Lord
Um,
Jesus.
Good morning, lovely
and ever
Marsha.
since then, I've always researched it and kind of followed
I guess.
the whole Bigfoot train, I guess you want to call it. Um, but and all the time that I personally spent in the wilderness in the woods fishing and hunting, like in my entire life, I'm in my mid 30s. I've only had one experience, but I guess I would say I'm on the train of I want to believe kind of thing, but I
Okay.
wouldn't say that I'm 100% a believer. I'm definitely not very much on the not believing train, so I'm in a weird position, I guess, when it comes to believing or not believing.
So would you say
I'm
you're open
leaning
to it and excited about it, but you're not saying that it's 100% true?
right. I want it to be true. Let's put it that way.
Okay. I'm in a similar position. As far as that goes. Uh, I'm very open to it. I'm very excited about it. I love looking into it, but I'm not going to just take things at face value. I'm not just going to say they exist because I want them to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've got to have the body. I know that's bad, right? But
Right,
like there's got to be solid scientific evidence before I'll sit there and say, "Yes, this is it."
right. Gasshole 100% believes in ghosts. I believe in ghosts too, but we'll get into that on another podcast, more so. But that's a really cool conversation to have. How about you, Rascal? You want to say a few words of introduction and let us know how you got into cryptids and where you stand on them?
Sure. I guess it really goes back to when I was a kid, outing myself here a little bit as far as age-wise, back in the 90s and stuff like that. Um, Growing up in Southern California, you get a chance to meet um some very interesting people. And it happened to be that my dad was a roofing contractor. And so, interesting people need roofs put over their heads, just like everyone else. And I used to go on jobs with him and kind of help out, like hand me the hammer, put this nail here, whatever. Um, and he ended up winning a bid for a guy by the name of Dr. Hank Prassman. You can Google him. There's even some chain emails left over, and he wrote a book called "The Secrets." I believe it's "The Secrets to Life." It's out of print now. It wasn't a real long book, but Hank kind of was one of the last of the old school adventurers and kind of, I guess you could say, seeking his own truth. He had a crystal skull. Um, he had a vault actually built into his house with a lot of stuff that he had collected over the years. Um, Went to a lot of interesting sites down in South America, all over the place. And I guess, I read that book, and ever since then, I kind of was into it, and that the 80s and the 90s I really consider like kind of the golden age for sightings because you didn't have, the camera phones and everything else, but you had cameras, and they
Mm,
started to get better and you start to have a lot of sightings and things like that. And I guess where I fall overall is I'm kind of in the same boat. Too often I see a lot of investigations take place with paranormal stuff or with cryptids, and it's not treated like a legitimate investigation.
right.
People aren't asking the right questions. And I guess I err more on there's probably a reasonable scientific reason, a way that I can explain, what someone saw, etc. I am not obtuse to the idea of certain cryptids, um, but I'm definitely a little more a little more Scully than Fox Mulder. You know what I'm saying?
I hear you. Hear you. Chat, what do you think? What are your thoughts on cryptids? And to define cryptids for today's conversation, there's the very focused definition of cryptids are animals that have not been discovered yet. We're going for a more broad sense of the word cryptids today, where it's animals or beings that aren't cataloged and categorized by modern science. Um, we're gonna be talking about a few of them today. Some local stuff to each of us, and then some of our favorite cryptids. And I encourage you guys in the chat to share your favorites, your experiences if you have any. Ask any questions, even voice your skepticism. We'd love to have that dialogue with you guys. Um, so I, like I said before, I want I want cryptids to be a lot of cryptids to be real because it's it's interesting and fantastical, and sometimes the apparent world around us, the world we absorb or observe, is it's a downer a lot of the time, and it can be very mundane and very trying, and to think that there's still something uh, extraordinary out there that we haven't found uh, could could distract me from those doldrums, and it can make the world a more vibrant and interesting place. So I hope for it. That said, a lot of the time my gut will tell me either somebody's lying or they're just not looking at all the facts around them, so it can be disproven what they're talking about. But those rare occasions where I'll hear a story, I'll see a recount of something, or I'll even notice something myself in my travels and the great outdoors that my gut doesn't dismiss, and that's when it's really exciting, and that's why I like talking about these things. And maybe, just maybe, if everybody stays interested in this and keeps looking, we'll find hard evidence and find new and interesting things, because science is discovering new life all over the planet all the time, right? So why not one of these things? But some are still. What's that, Gas? What are you asking? Um, when I asked these guys to come up with a local cryptid, I'm from Ohio. I'm living in Georgia now, so I'm like, okay, I need to look around for Georgia cryptids because I didn't grow up with the stories down here. I just moved here a year and a half ago, um, so I had to do some looking, and oddly, um, oh, someone's still okay. I got you. I got you. Oddly, there's not a lot of cryptid stories in Georgia, except for three. One of them is Bigfoot, and Bigfoot is seemingly everywhere. And we're going to talk about Bigfoot today. I have a hard time talking about cryptids and such without talking about Bigfoot. The other two um, were kind of, I wasn't expecting here in Georgia. One of them, my gut tells me right out the gate, is just not real. And if one day I find out I'm wrong, then sweet, because it's the Georgia Raptor. Have you guys heard about this?
No. So it's a
I
dinosaur that hangs out in Georgia?
I have never heard
Yeah.
of the Georgia Raptor.
The Georgia Raptor. Apparently, some guys, and it wasn't too long ago, uh, saw, as they described, a raptor like from Jurassic Park in a field in Georgia, in middle Georgia. They swear by it, but there's no other accounts, and it just seems a little too off for me. Let's see. Mancha says, not sure if it counts as cryptid. I used to see vaguely humanoid shapes when I was little at night. There were two figures, one who I perceived to be an adult, and another that looked like a child since it was smaller. They used to watch me when I was sleeping or trying to sleep. They didn't make any noise, they would just watch me and wave. When I got older, my father told me of similar things he experienced as a kid, around the same age as I saw these things. He said it would range between humanoid shapes or a butterfly shape. That, to me, well, right off, it doesn't sound like a cryptid, but it does sound really interesting. And my kind of European supernatural being catalog is flipped open here to something to do maybe with the Fae or land spirits like that. That's what that
Fairies.
sounds like. Have you guys heard any stories about that? I know it's a little off topic, but we can talk about it for a second.
It sounds to me kind of like the stories of the fairy people that watch children and stuff like that. It might tie into that, or it could be like spiritual beings.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah, I have a buddy who he spent a lot of time amongst the Lakota Sioux with some of their medicine men, and he was very much into that side of things, fairies and stuff like that. And even going out and making offerings, he had standing stones actually that were naturally occurring in his backyard, and things like that. And what you're describing is very much something that his wife at the time was heavily into, and actually really did talk about the butterfly aspect of it, making an appearance pretty frequently, and I guess you could call them her visions, something like that. Um, Generally speaking, they're nothing, according to him, nothing to be alarmed about. They're generally not malignant. They're always usually more mischievous than anything else.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard similar things. Um, land like all that to me gets defined under what I would call land whites or land spirits. Um, a really interesting rabbit hole to dive down for sure. Raptor would hunt humans. Are there any unknown animal attacks in Georgia? Um, I mean some, but a raptor, like, for one, there wouldn't just be one raptor, right? There would be more of them, and that's not. While they are a stealthy hunter and scavenger, um, that's kind of a loud thing to happen. You know what I mean?
I mean, you
Uh,
could also err on the side with the raptor thing that it could possibly be a scientific creation, like a Jurassic Park type deal. Like some group got together,
some
strapped
sort of
on some
experiment.
DNA, made an experiment. Yeah, I mean, that could be a plausible thing, I guess. I don't know.
I think it would almost have to be something like that. My friend who lives in Jersey went walking around the forest where the Jersey Devil said to roam. He was scared shitless. Not sure if we saw anything or heard anything. Um, Yet sometimes just the idea of a thing in an area can make people uh, feel like an ominous presence. Like it can make people feel stuff that they normally wouldn't feel just walking through regular woods, just because they've heard stories. And that can actually hamper investigation.
Kind of psych themselves out.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely a major psychological component to that. I used to hunt pretty far up in the north where I am, and the place where I hunted was very weird. It was a combination of like fir pine, and a lot of new growth forests like poplar. And because it was right next to a creek, if it happened to be that there were some temperature shifts, you would get this really, if you know anything about hunting, you got to go early in the morning, and then you're staying out usually, until late in the evening, and you're walking back dark, and you're
Hmm.
walking along these old logging trails and stuff like that. And this trail went through these really creepy, you know, uh, moss covered, pine trees, and then a fog would settle like in amongst like these pine trees, and you'd have to walk through it, and you're like, oh,
Yeah, it'll mess with your
and
mind.
yeah, and up there, like, we reintroduced the wolf population, and then the sun starts going down. You start hearing coyotes, and then you start hearing wolves, and you're like, oh boy, and suddenly, you become very aware that you're alone in the middle of nowhere, miles from any civilization on an old logging trail.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, all right, one foot in front of the other. One foot. I don't even want to look around. One foot in front of the other.
Yep. Keep
Get the
on.
hell out of Dodge.
Keep on swimming. Keep on. Uh, I guess says that the raptor couldn't survive in a swamp. They can't swim well. Yeah, any bipedal creature with relatively small footprint, like a raptor would have a really hard time in the swamp. Um,
Well, let's also consider the fact that your stereotypical velociraptor is not that big. The ones that you see in the movies and things like that, these huge
I'm
raptors are more like a
I'm
Utah raptor.
I'm really glad you brought that up because they described it as a raptor like Jurassic Park. So right off the bat, it's kind of misnamed because the raptors, quote unquote raptors in Jurassic Park, were much more like the Velociraptor's larger fucking uncle, Deinonychus.
The
Yeah.
Dunconicus. Yep.
Yeah.
They were very big. The actual Velociraptors would be actually probably fine in a swamp because they're so light. They're very bird-like and much smaller. But that's a dinosaur topic, which I'd love to talk about dinosaurs sometime. But that veers more and more off topic. So,
Oh man,
uh,
I listen. I almost chose Mokilia Membe as my favorite cryptid.
nice, nice. The out here, there's a lot of cryptid type things like Chupacabra or La Llorona. Given our location, La Llorona is more of a ghost thing. Yeah, that's the weeping woman that drowns children, if I remember correctly. But the
Yep.
Chupacabra, the goat blood drinking mangy chihuahua of the Southwest, is very interesting. A lot of the supposed chupacabra bodies people have found have turned out to be
Canine.
dogs and other canids with mange and stuff. But
Yeah.
that's not to say it's disproven. It's just saying that those are not the bodies of a chupacabra. They're very like the the regional lock on the chupacabra. I find to be interesting. Um, Actually, it makes me give it a little more of an open mind because there's some animals that are just very regionally locked, and that copying that kind of rings a little true for me. But I I want to learn more about the chupacabra. I want to know, is it also a native myth, or is it purely from after the Spanish had
Right.
already come in, right? So there's a
Yep.
lot more to know about it. What have you guys heard
Yeah.
about it?
A migratory myth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. See, and now I'm on that spectrum where there
Hey
might be a
Autumn, how
really
you doing?
simple answer to this. Um. And things like weasels specifically will kill for fun of it. They're one
Mm-hmm.
of the only animals that will kill for sport, right?
Right.
And as far as I can recollect, I believe that some weasels will do that. They will like bite the jugular, and they'll sit there and they'll lap the blood up. And so I wonder if there's not a reasonable explanation for this, that if a some sort of canid, like a coyote or something like that, is not afflicted with a certain kind of disease, if this doesn't alter its behavior, perhaps, and its predations.
Right.
It's kind of like the old thing of pregnant women having strange and bizarre off the wall cravings, like all of a sudden they're eating like pickles and ice cream,
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it almost makes me wonder if that's not the simple answer, that, that's not what this thing's craving. There we go.
Right. Right. Yeah, I guess well, a cat with mange wouldn't be too shocking for me. Like any creature about that size with mange slash rabies or what have you, would likely fit the bill. For the chupacabra. Okay, so yeah, so the raptor, like I said, the Georgia Raptor wasn't something that I was buying. It didn't strike true to me, and it's subjective. It's a gut feeling. So absolutely, guys, feel free look into it if you're interested about the Georgia Raptor. But that is actually not the one I wanted to choose. Not the one I went with for my local cryptid, even though we ended up talking about it anyway. My local cryptid is one that really surprised me, but not in the I 100% disbelieve it way, and that is the Altamaha-ha sea monster, or Alti, of the Georgia coast. Um, Globally, there's all kinds of stories about these kind of uh, water dinosaur type monsters, from Champy in Lake Champlain to the mother of them all. It seems like the Loch Ness monster, which I'm sadly on the side of the Loch Ness monster being a hoax. But that doesn't to me then say all of similar ones are a hoax. But we can get to that if we want later. But apparently there was one in Georgia, probably an hour away from me, actually. So I'm going to read a little bit about um, Alti here from the Explore Southern History site. Um, so the mysterious Altamaha-ha is a river or sea monster that some say live in the coastal marshes and twisting channels around the mouth of the Altamaha River. It's often seen in areas around Darien and Butler Island in Georgia. Popular part of the culture and folklore of coastal Georgia is it's one of the most often cited monsters in North America, apparently. The stories of it uh, date back to the natives in the area, but more interestingly, when it comes to the Loch Ness monster, is that the areas of Darien were founded by Scott Highlanders from the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland. I don't know if that makes it more interesting or takes away from it, but there it is. The exact nature of Alti is as mysterious as the domain in which it lives. Some, of course, say it is nothing but floating logs, masses of vegetation of no marine creatures. Believers, however, tell of a 30-foot long animal with flippers like a seal. It made national headlines in 1981 when Larry Gwynn reported seeing the creature while fishing with his friend Stephen Wilson. They said it had two big humps about 5 feet apart and left behind a wake like that of a speedboat. The article goes on to say a couple more sightings just like that. One in particular, um, the primary witness was a Captain Delano of the schooner Eagle, who saw a monster off St. Simon's Island below the mouth of the Altamaha. His quote was, he repeated the particulars precisely, describing the animal he saw as being about 70 feet long and its circumference about that of a sugar hogshead, moving with its head shaped like an alligator's about 8 feet out of the water. A hogshead is a big barrel or cask. The sightings reported in 1981 are very similar to those appearing in 1830. Five men on the schooner also saw a number of planters from St. Simon's Island. told correspondents that they had seen something strange as well. Okay, so several other people in the area said they saw something strange as well. It appeared in St. Simon's Sound that year and was viewed through telescopes over a period of several weeks. So, sea monsters. I think a lot of these are probably big fish. Like in this case, probably it could be a large gar, or something to that effect. Um, and my reason for thinking that is, in such systems as like a lake typically is because there's nowhere for that thing to go. So the likelihood of it being discovered, especially after it's died, goes up a little bit. What makes this case more interesting to me is it's in rivers and among the islands right there on the coast. So it can go upriver, downriver, into the ocean, anywhere. So it makes it more interesting to me in that regard. I would make hey, what's up, Ninth Pond? 100% real pot of manatees. Manatees is another possibility. I don't think right now. I think this is a cool story. I think it's probably a gar. I think it could be manatees. Um, but because it can come and go over vast distances, it doesn't shut it down to me like it does like the Georgia Raptor. What do you guys think?
And when were the first recorded sightings of this?
1830.
Yeah. Now, we have to remember that, that long ago, some animals may have had a greater range than others and things like that. But people see things in the moment, especially if they spook something out. Gar can be a very, very big fish. Uh, and I could see, they also can, hunt in the shallows, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
if something like you scared one of those up or spooked it, one that was big enough, and it, kind of hit the juice and started swimming away, you could see to where its snout might raise up out of the water and it would leave, a considerable wake. I mean, I've seen gar that are like over 6 feet long.
For
So,
sure.
yeah, um, that would personally be my take on it. Yes.
What do you think, Wicked? Thanks for the sub, by the way.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the sea monsters in general, like we don't have to specifically talk about the one you're talking about. I think they're all rooted in basically they're rooted in some kind of like people saw something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what that something was is what you could actually debate what it is and what it's not. It's just that there's so many reports over, I don't know, man's been on the ocean for, I don't know, a long time. And all these reports are consistent and they happen all the time. And we find that the bottom of the ocean is basically unexplored by humans. Like we started looking, but what we know the bottom of the ocean, we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, Ninth Pond was just saying that. Absolutely.
And I think that I'd say 99% of the cases are misidentifications, right? They're fish that we know of, there's scenarios, weather's important, fog plays into the fact, the person's mental health, the event that they're in. But I think for reals, though, there's that 1% of those experiences that were probably actually an undiscovered something, an undiscovered species of some sort.
Right. Possible yet improbable. It's
Yeah.
not
I
likely,
mean,
but
yeah. I mean, look at how long they said the giant squid were a thing.
right. That's true. That is so true.
And then that guy in Japan went and made the squid cam, right?
The
Mm-hmm.
old
And
squid.
got it on, we
Yeah.
got that scientific proof.
Right. Right. And a lot of these places where, in Alti's case, where it's being sited, isn't heavily populated areas. It's abandoned rice fields. It's parts of the river where nothing's built along because it's all, you can't really build on that land. Um,
Hmm.
so it's not like there's people there every day that could possibly see such things. So it could maybe be something undiscovered. However, it's likely, I think, that it's a
Specific
gar or
dedication. Yep.
mantis, right?
Yep.
Ninth Pond says he grew up around fishermen on the Florida coast, guys who went out there every single day. A lot of them had stories about weird stuff out there, and there were things they had personally seen. Um, there's something about the water, right? That it it inspires the imagination. It When you're seeing the same thing for so long, the surface of that water, any any change can seem way bigger than it actually is and way different. There's a lot of mind tricks going on in that. On that same note, again, giant squid and stuff. There's the possibilities of stuff being there, but we cannot ignore the fact that it can play tricks on your mind. At least that's my thought.
Yeah. As someone that's swam in, in the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes, there's a factor of that, like, you always think about, you know, sharks and stuff like that and kind of what lies beneath. When you're out there, in the middle of the ocean and it's you in that boat, you become supremely aware of how alone you really are. And, keeping in mind that we really haven't been traversing the world's oceans under motor power for that long. Uh,
Right.
we've been kind of at the mercy of the winds, so to speak, for quite a long time. And I think that there's something very primal, um, about being kind of at the mercy. I mean, you are at the ultimate mercy of nature when you're on the open ocean. And even when swimming in the Great Lakes, because if you get far enough out there, number one, you're not going to want to swim in them. They're just too cold, even in the summer. Um, but it's a large body of open water, even though it's fresh water, right?
Right.
But you still hear those stories about, that series of shark attacks that happened. I want to say it was the 1920s, along the river on the East Coast that happened really far inland,
And Jersey.
and they
Jersey. Yep.
the bull sharks
Hmm.
um, are able to traverse into fresh water, and you think, like, what if I'm sitting here dangling and treading water in the middle of Lake Superior or something like that, like, ugh,
Yeah.
and that whole those bodies of water have their own kind of gravity to them, you know.
Right. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Autumn
Fear
says,
plays into a lot about what you see too.
oh, for sure, for sure. Autumn says dehydration is something that could play a part in seeing different things as well. That's true. Um, Ninth Pond says some of that was directly tied to the amount of alcohol they consumed out there, but a lot of the other stories came from more reliable fishermen. In a sea of tall tales, there's bound to be some true stories. That's I can't be convinced otherwise. Someone caught a small bull shark in Cuyahoga River 2 years ago. I'm not incredibly surprised there. Bull sharks are crazy. They've been known to swim all the way up the Mississippi too. It's crazy.
All the way to the Ohio River, there's been
Oh
bull
yeah.
sharks caught in
yeah,
Cincinnati.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
And they're vicious
And
little fuckers.
I can't remember who it was that decided to traverse the. Was it? It might have been uh Kontiki. I believe that it was like kind of like a very primitive form of traveling the open water, where they would have to basically sleep under the stars, on this boat, if you want to really call it that. and they would talk about stuff that would like come up the surface of the water, like whales, in the evening, and then at night, like stuff that had like bioluminescence. And you get the feeling he's probably talking about those giant squid and stuff like that. But if you think about that, you're a piece of, to them, to these whatever these critters are, you're like a piece of flotsam, and they'll just go and check it out, like, what is this thing that's in my natural, domain, and stuff like that. So yeah, the water's a very primal place, and you are just so supremely aware on any large body of water, whether or not it's the Mississippi, the Great Lakes, any of the oceans or seas, that you are so minuscule
Hmm.
in the hierarchy of things.
Yeah. Even the lap and motion of the waves can almost be hypnotic as well, which definitely can play into tricking your mind. Like Ninth Pond says, it can mesmerize you almost, um, causing hallucinations, which adds to all the craziness. And just there, I don't think there's a person on the planet that thinks that they know everything about what's under the water, and the fear of the unknown is instinctual in all human beings, um, like at the core of things. So I think that plays a large part in any water sightings as well. But
But hey,
yeah,
man, uh, w- you never know. It's 2020, so there's still hope for Cthulhu yet.
yeah, sleeping in his tomb in Ryloth. Yeah,
Ugh.
yeah. Oh man, Lovecraftian old guys. F the ocean, says Matcha. Matcha is not a fan of the ocean, and World of Warcraft and I think Cataclysm is when the whale sharks came out. Somehow she got killed by one of the whale sharks, and that just cemented her hatred of the deep. Poor girl.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Speaking of whale sharks, I actually got to swim with a whale shark, and it's kind of cool, but overall, I wouldn't recommend it. A little bit boring.
Well, funny you should mention swimming with the whale sharks. Last year was Blonde Solo's 40th birthday, so I took her to the Atlanta Aquarium and got her the package where she could snorkel in the big tank with the manta rays and the whale sharks and everything, and she loved it. Of course, it was calm, and it was, she's basically just swimming at the surface of the water, but she got to be real close to creatures she adores. She loves the ocean, and one of the whale sharks actually rubbed against her as it swam underneath her, and she was tickled about that. We got some really good pictures. So for some people, it's quite the experience, but it's not the the crazy action-packed excitement that some people would think of swimming with the shark. Um, Fucker snuck up on you. You're wearing your Cthulhu stuff. Nice. I'm not a beach person, but there's something about sailing a boat and losing sight of the land that really calms me down. Um, I like the water. The beach is only good for me because I can fish off of it. It's not the actual. I want to go to the beach and hang out at the beach. No, if I go there, I want to fish. But I love being on the water. I love the feel of the water. I love that power coming at me. It's like Njord himself is making his presence known to me, and it's very spiritual. The only water animal I want to swim with is a manatee. Your people, big old sea cows. They're wonderful and gentle beasts, but they imagine swimming in a puddle of cow shit, because that's what swimming with manatees is like. Exactly, because they are constantly shitting giant piles just like a cow. Oddly, people confuse them for mermaids, and I still don't get that. I guess it's some of that sea delirium that we were
Oh,
talking about.
that rum, you mean?
Yeah, the rum probably helped.
Them
Do you know?
rum goggles?
Speaking of mermaids, did you know that lobsters are just mermaids for scorpions?
Wow.
Uh, um, uh, well, besides manatees too, I guess beluga whales.
Okay. Yeah, I just saw a
Um,
video of somebody playing catch with the beluga whale.
yeah, well, they're really smart, it turns out. And the way their muscular structure is set up, if they you could see to where if you were a sailor that had fallen in the water, or something like that, or you were at a distance, the if they present the right profile, the way their muscle system is set up, and they flex and go to swim, it will actually look kind of like they have legs.
Oh,
It,
okay.
it sounds weird, but you can Google a picture of it, and I think it's either a beluga whale or a pilot whale. I can't remember which.
Sounds super
But anyway,
interesting.
yeah, I saw it and I was like, dang. I was like, I could, I could see it if you were a little, you know, had a little too much grog that day, or or what have you. You could see it,
Okay,
like a legitimate, mistake, I guess. But yeah.
cool. All right, I think we covered as much as we could about Alti and similar sea cryptid sightings. So if we want to move on, who wants to give me a their local cryptid? Who wants to go next?
I s- I can do that.
Cool.
So for this one, we're gonna have to go all the way to Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Elkhorn, Wisconsin, for a little bit of background, is kind of a rural farming town. It's got one main drag. You might even call it idyllic, I guess. Kind of your quintessential, stereotypical small town, with your general store and your pharmacy. Um, they have fairs there, and they have a local kind of local cryptid, and it's referred to commonly as the Beast of Bray Road, uh, Man Wolf, Wolf Bear, a couple other names. Now, they say that the first sightings go back all the way to around 1936. There were a couple accounts of this, like, that I could find going back even into the 1880s, but very loosely. But the oldest account that we have is, they say, is from 1936. It's actually not true. It's actually a secondhand story, second or third hand story, about being told by a grandson, uh, and the grandson is telling the story that his grandfather told it. So we're a couple generations removed. But Bray Road is a long country road out into rural Wisconsin, outside Milwaukee. There's not a lot of lampposts. It's mostly all farming fields with new growth forest. It gets quite, humid in Wisconsin, especially southern Wisconsin, and there are creeks all over the place and stuff like that. So the bulk of these stories actually started coming out in the early 90s, and it was initially picked up by a reporter who, believe it or not, wrote a book on this, and she is firmly in the camp that this is a real, you know, thing. And it's generally described as going on both two legs and four, very much that stereotypical wolf man uh, profile, I guess you could call it.
Hmm.
Um, and the reporter's name was Linda Godfrey, and she wrote a book, and the book is called, I think it was like On the Trail of Wisconsin's Wolf Man, or In Pursuit of the Beast of Bray Road. Um, yes, the Beast of Bray Road, track or tailing Wisconsin's werewolf. And to this day, I've been to Bray Road personally, driven up at night, and it is eerie because, like I said, there are very few, lampposts and things like that. And the ones that when I was there, that are kind of before you really get far out on the Bray Road, like sometimes that the street lights will start to yellow and turn orange over time.
Hmm.
And so again, you can imagine this thick fog that starts accumulating over this road, with that orange yellow light shining down over it. You're kind of like, a little weird. It starts setting the mood, so to speak,
Right.
when you're doing a little monster hunting. But kids to this day will still go out and they'll still look for this locally. You'll get a lot of people that drive out there. Um, and this woman, Linda Godfrey, this reporter, she took several sightings, and stuff like that, and was really convinced. Um, and it usually, people equate it to Bigfoot, but again, it's more like again that werewolf style cryptid. And it's reported to be as tall as 7 feet standing, with a gray brown fur, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and so you can there was actually a movie made in 2018 about it. Um, it's not very good. But if you're into the B horror movie, you can check it out. Uh, Overall, though, it comes to be where you get a lot of these stories and things like that, and they start to have an influence on you. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you know, as far as asking the right questions, you can be fooled or whatever. If you're asking leading questions, you're already like giving the person that you're asking the question an answer. You know what I'm saying? Because that you're kind of telegraphing what you want them to hear.
Right.
And it's stuff when I start seeing like from this account, right? This guy's telling a story from when he's a child. Um, and you start to see these just slight exaggerations in story. Like we had a 140-pound Akita who stood 6 foot on his hind legs.
Hmm.
Okay, I mean, so anyone that knows anything, a quick Google search away. Uh, Akitas don't get to 140 pounds without being incredibly obese.
Right.
You know, they're not that big. So there's one little one, and then this is in the 90s, by the way. This is taking place in the 90s, and it's we had one of those old megalites that had the power of 1,000 candles.
Oh, right. Right.
Okay, well, you know, okay, stuff like that. And it ticks the story ticks all of the classic, you know, it hits all the marks of all these previous statements that have been, you know, said. You
Hmm.
start to see stuff like that. Um, but what is very funny is, oh boy, uh, let me see if I could just oh, if I can find it here, because there's um there's websites that you can go to kind of go and check this stuff out. And I'm going to warn you that because Elkhorn is a small town, the police take stuff pretty seriously. And here's just kind of a funny review. Wait till the end. I'm gonna read it. This is a great local legend, and visiting it provides some fun insight into the stories of dogmen terrorizing the Midwest. The road is definitely more populated than you might have been led to believe, but it's a neat photo op nonetheless. Do be cautious if you visit after dark. We did, and the police were there in less than 10 minutes to ask us what we were up to. It didn't help that I was wearing a full body fursuit.
God, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Next level
I'm gonna tell
strats
you
there.
guys, if you go out there, probably don't throw your full body fursuit on. It's not a good look. Um,
Don't investigate
But
cryptids in a fursuit. Period.
yeah, don't do that. Not a good idea. Um, you know, but you see these stories, right, of werewolves kind of they pop up all over the place, whether or
Mhm.
not, you want to tie them into like, the skinwalking thing or what have you. Um, that's another thing. But it is a fun local legend and it's still kind of ongoing. There's been a few things on the History Channel where they're still looking for it. It is also, it is more populated, but it's also a lot of farmland and small standing woods. And, so that's really about it. Take it for what you will. The easy explanation is, well, what stands on two legs that could possibly be around there? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is a black bear.
Yeah.
So you imagine trucking along and stuff like that. Even in the early '90s and late '80s, it's probably going to be even less incorporated, less well lit. So imagine driving down this road where the last of the lampposts are, where they're yellowed and not that great, and there's a fog on the ground, and you see something on the edge of the road standing up, looking at you, and the headlights on your car hit the eyes on it, and they reflect, and you're like, ah, that's that would kind of freak you out, I'd imagine.
True.
Especially if you were up or maybe partaking of the devil's lettuce,
A little,
or something like that.
the marijuana cigarettes.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, like a bear would make sense to me in that regard. However, uh, I really enjoy the idea of shape shifting cryptids because what better way for them to not get caught is if they can then become something else. So, like a werewolf or what have you, which there are werewolf stories, like you touched on, in almost every culture. So that's intriguing in of itself. Whether it's skinwalkers or more traditional werewolves, or even the feral mental state of the French stories. But the idea that maybe this beast of Bray Road or whatever is is a farmer or a family that has this trait in them that they've kept secret forever. Like that's compelling to me and not something that I feel can just be flat out refuted. Um, but like I said, could be a bear. Perfectly plausible to be a bear.
It could be a bear, could be a combination of things. Again, could be a coyote. Not going to be any wolves that far south. You know, um, like I said, could be a combination of two. Like someone sees a bear. Well, I saw something else. Okay, well, it's a coyote. Well, it ran across my hood, and stuff like that, and I didn't get a good look at it. Stuff like that. The Yeah, like the generational, secret thing uh, with shape shifting, something like that. Yeah, there's some of that I think pretty much in every culture in some form or another.
Yeah.
So yeah,
What do you
hard to
think, Wicked?
discount it, especially if they're hanging out
What's
Right.
amongst
that?
all the populace.
Yeah, if they're hiding in plain sight, it's hard. What do you think of all of it, Wicked?
Uh, you know, the whole thing behind the shapeshifters is it's so man, it's that lore has been around like since humans have been telling stories. And locally, you want to think, well, is this tie into the supernatural or is this tie into the physical world? And that's my problem with Bigfoot. Like, and I'm not trying to get off topic of werewolf, but like the biggest thing with me and Bigfoot is if it exists in the forest as a giant ape, right? That would be the scientific view on it. We would have found it. I'm just saying, we would have found it, especially in North America. Maybe in the Amazon or something like that, where it's not that explored or the population's very low. If it would, if a giant ape existed in North America, I'm 99.9999% sure we would have found it by now. So the only explanation that my brain starts going to is the fact that it's spiritual, interdimensional, or some other shit where it's able to avoid our detection. And werewolves are exactly the same thing, because if there would have been a giant wolf man that's not supernatural, like some kind of hybrid or something, we would have found it by now. Just straight up. It would have been found. Somebody would have, some redneck in the middle of nowhere would have shot it and brought it in. Like it would have just happened. That's kind of how I view the whole werewolf Bigfoot thing. It has to be of the realm of the supernatural.
See, if it's a sentient thinking more like we know of sentience, then I could see it evading because the deep woods are super deep. Um, but if it's just animalistic, the likelihood rises that it would just be found. So, but we can talk about Bigfoot a little bit later. Um, but yeah,
Of course,
Bray.
if it's a true shapeshifter, right, it
Mhm.
could be human and we couldn't, we couldn't discern that it was a werewolf.
Right, right,
And it definitely, these sightings definitely fit the more like these accounts, if they're to be believed, definitely fit the more sentient shapeshifter um, framework because no one's ever been attacked.
right.
And once it's sighted, it takes off. It's gone. It has no interest in kind of dealing with humans. You know,
Yeah, no one to interact in any way.
yeah, no, no, not none at all.
Cool. Yeah,
Like,
the
hey, direct me to your nearest Taco Bell.
yeah. Well, the Beast of Bray Road is one of the more known cryptids. Not quite as known as Sasquatch, but definitely has gotten some press. So there's some cool stuff about it. So viewers, I urge you to dig in for yourself and make your own decision on what's presented to you. But it is a really cool story. I was excited when I heard Rascal was going to talk about it today. Especially large and dense forests. Here we have the Ocala forest where people have evaded authorities that were after them for years. Some woods, less so where he's talking because those are mainly new woods, like used to be pastures and prairies or whatever that have been replanted somewhat relatively recently. But some of the old woods, the deep woods, not even rednecks really go in there, and if they do, they're not talking about what they're doing back there. Um, but yeah, there's it's not quite as uncharted as say the bottom of the ocean, but there's definitely still some crooks and crannies and nooks in
Yeah,
America that are
yeah.
pretty
A
untouched.
lot of people don't understand that Wisconsin specifically was uh, old growth pine forest, and Wisconsin was built on logging operations. So out of where I live alone, millions of square feet of pine were logged out and floated downriver. So you have to go really far north to see old growth pine. So that's what we mean by new growth is what came in after. Um, and there's a place called Lost Lake in Wisconsin where literally the logging uh, operation burnt down, and they only made it halfway around this crystal, and I mean crystal clear lake. It's a sand bottom like crystal clear lake, and they stop, and it's really cool because half of it is new growth, and then the other half is old growth of these huge pine trees, and it's wide open. It's completely different. There's not that thick underbrush except for the occasional fern and stuff like that. And again, that's like very primal and very cool to see what Wisconsin would have looked like, back, before the turn of the century and stuff like that.
Before it got stripped down.
Yeah, before it got stripped down. Yeah, it's actually kind of sad when you see it. You're like, man, this is so much cooler than what we have around here.
Yeah. There's a whole different feel in old growth forests. No matter where you are, like there's this natural kind of connective power in places like that that I just thrive on, and when I find it, I never want to leave. If you believe in such things, which I do. I'm not talking weapon grade shades here, but I am talking about a natural like sense of vibration.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, untouched by machine.
Right. Do we have anything else to talk about the Beast of Bray Road?
No, that's it.
Cool. Cool, cool. All right. Wicked. Let's leave the Sasquatch for last. So the other cryptid you were looking to talk about today
Uh,
was
my other crypt was Mothman. Um, I've done a lot of research on it over the years. I've been to Point Pleasant. I've been to the Mothman Museum. I've watched countless documentaries and I've watched the movie, and it's really strange. And then here recently, I read a article about a retired special ops officer from that time period, and he said that most of the sightings he believed were from their secret operations in the area where they were wearing night vision goggles. They were paratrooping into the area. Some interesting parallels. I mean, that doesn't explain all of the sightings or the premonitions and certain things like that people had, but the the majority of the sightings that I've read over the years can a lot of them fall into the category of hysteria and or absolute just misidentification, right?
Mhm.
Be- Because if you have a bunch of your local friends and neighbors reporting that they're seeing something, you're going to be much more inclined to see something as well, right? It's just human nature.
Right.
And it's it goes back, like, from my research, the interesting things I find is the Native Americans in the Ohio Valley, specifically the Point Pleasant area and the Marietta area. There's cultures of Native Americans there that are like date, way back. And
Mhm.
they made huge mounds. There's all, like, I could talk several podcasts about that, right? But they had a native story, and it talked about a bird, and it was what we would call a phoenix, right? A huge bird, like
Mhm.
a pterodactyl or whatever. And I think that the Mothman ties into that. That's what makes me root. Like, these stories are much older than just like people saying like the Mothman, right?
Right.
That area along the Ohio River there's been stories of a ancient bird, a huge bird, a gigantic bird for, I mean, pretty much as long as man has been telling stories in that area. So, I mean, tens of thousands of years, maybe. Um, as you have places like the Serpent Mound, and they've done excavations on the Serpent Mound, and they think it predates the pyramids.
Hmm.
Like, we're talking 6,000 BC now with the Serpent Mound. So people have been doing stuff in that area, the Ohio River Basin, for, I don't know, longer than written history says, for sure. And again, with the whole Mothman thing, there's the physical thing where you see the creature, and then there's a whole lot of people that describe never seeing it, but having it in their head, like dreams or vision states, or a lot of people have premonitions, like dreams about the future. And that's kind of where I stem from. Like, is it paranormal? Is it a spiritual being? Is it a physical being? Is there a big half, a giant moth flying around West Virginia? Like, what's actually going on?
Yeah, I don't think personally that the Mothman is that narrow view of a cryptid. I don't think it's an animal. Um, I think it's uh, before I dive into the rabbit hole with you of the Mothman and where that can lead. There's an interesting phenomenon that the Mothman is part of outside of its local legend, and that is the idea of harbingers. In various places, uh, people have noticed cryptids or legendary creatures just before times of great catastrophe. The Jersey Devil's one of them, actually, that some people say when it's you sight the Jersey Devil, something bad's going to happen. And it's really interesting that the Mothman happens to be one of these creatures, these harbingers of disaster. And that would, if that is true, like if that observance actually rings true with that idea, then to me it lends even more to it being either um, spiritual or not either. They could be both one and the same, extra dimensional or spiritual, rather than uh, an animal like, that we haven't identified yet. Does that make sense to y'all?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm on the boat with.
So, go, going back to the special operations guy and wearing NVGs, are we suggesting that that's what people were seeing?
Yeah, that's what he wrote in his book. Yeah,
Like
he
that they were
definitely
seeing
said,
paratroopers.
yeah, they were seeing paratroopers, special forces paratroopers in the area doing basically just secret training exercises in the area. And they there was some illustrations where they showed a paratrooper at night with the goggles and the parachute, and it does. I mean, if you're in a forested area and you're looking through the trees or along a dark road, it looks like a great big frickin' Mothman. It really does.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. I was
So
gonna
what?
say how.
Go ahead.
uh, I was gonna say how funny would it be if imagine one of those guys, right? You're a hunter or you're doing whatever it is that you do, none of my business, right? In those woods, and imagine you're strutting along through the trees, and one of those guys got hung up. His chute got hung up in the tree, and he's like, you're his two Raluin, and all of a sudden you look up, there's this dark figure with NVGs on, basically black uniform or very dark green, probably at the time. It's possible what they would have been wearing, with this big pluming thing. Maybe there's a little bit of a breeze pluming out behind him, because his chute is stuck up in the tree and he's just hanging there. He doesn't have a real safe way to drop. So what do? Well, you either risk the drop and cut your chute, or you have to wait for your buddies to come and get you out of the tree safely. But imagine like looking up and seeing that in a tree. That's gonna freak pretty much anyone out,
Right.
right? Unexpectedly. And I'm not gonna ask a lot of questions. Whether or not I identify that as some commando doing secret squirrel stuff hanging in a tree, I'm not asking. I'm not hanging around. I'm probably just running away you know and then you have the adrenaline factor kicking in. uh so you could see that that's pretty plausible, actually.
Um,
Crazy, isn't
so
it?
so what doesn't ring true for me with that is the sightings weren't just somebody walking through the woods. It was a car being chased by something that was flying along with them. It was uh, peering in the front windows and doors of a home. It was uh, on the bridge that eventually collapsed. Like this isn't a place where military personnel would do these behaviors or be chilling. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
where it kind of loses some of
And
its grip.
what I'm saying though is that a lot of the sightings could be explained by that.
Some of the sightings, say okay.
Obviously, not things like chasing cars or peeking in people's houses or the whole premonitions thing, right? That's out the window.
Right.
I can give you a few instances why commandos might be hanging out around a bridge or peeking in through some windows. You know, uh, especially if you're running, some sort of covert training exercise in amongst the public, and your idea is to maintain stealth and gauge the awareness of the public itself. You know, I can still make an argument for that. You know,
Uh, like there's conjecture about such a thing happening, but there's not like that's not something that's 100% proven to happen.
hey, remember MK Ultra though?
Well,
They did flat out use like alien abductions as an excuse, as a cover. I
fair
don't know.
enough.
I mean,
Feed the
Fair
legend.
enough.
it's on the table, right?
Right.
And it definitely gives a logical explanation, right, to a lot of the sightings.
Oh, sure, sure, absolutely.
And
Movie.
there's the go ahead.
Go ahead. I was
The
just
thing is,
go ahead.
okay. So the thing is with that is like we talked about, how we view cryptids, right? Like what is our belief? How we going to believe in what? And this to me ties into that because I can explain most of the Mothman stuff away with that explanation right there. Now, that's not all of it, and there's a lot more that goes into that with like Native American beliefs and other stories that are told. But in general, the sightings, the majority of the sightings could be explained away by using that explanation.
Gotcha. Okay. My guest was talking about needing to do one of these on Moonville, Ohio. Is that the Moonville Tunnel? Is that what you're talking about?
hmm
Yeah.
I have a lot of info on that too, and I've had personal experiences there too. I
That,
go a couple of times each year. It's very interesting.
that'd be more for what the Ghost cast.
It's definitely paranormal.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll hit that up. So the Mothman also brings me into to other ideas of the extra dimensional kind of conversation, the spiritual conversation, um, and these guys I've told all of you. I've told about the mini series. Well, I guess it's not a mini series. A show on YouTube and Amazon, Hellier. Which, if any of you guys from Hellier end up catching this, awesome. Hey, what's up? We have a lot of varied opinions about that, but there are some interesting things that I hadn't started really thinking about that came out in that show, and that's the idea of um, extra dimensional beings communicating, interacting, and uh, influencing our world, our dimension. And I really think the Mothman, if all that rings true, if all that is true, um, the Mothman has got to be a big part of that in that area. It's right real close to Hellier and was it Somerset or whatever with the goblins, the alien goblin type
Yep.
things. The Mammoth Cave system, all that. That's a whole nother rabbit hole and a can of worms that I would love to break open in more depth than we have time for today. But all that's very interesting to me, and it would make sense um, for the Mothman to be one of these extra dimensional beings, because then it could be here sometimes and then not be here, so we can't track it down. And the other sightings, some more mundane sightings or whatever, could very well be these troopers or other tests or what have you. Um, so that's definitely something I want to look more into. And chat, if you have anything to add to that, I would love to hear about that. Whole time you have a first-hand experience with MK Ultra. You have proof too. Whoa, gas. That's intense. That is intense. Um, what was I gonna say? was to say something else about Mothman. I don't remember.
I want the lamp, brother. Give me the lamp.
The lamp.
I mean, I can give a little more. When I went to the museum, there's a lot in the museum. It's really neat. They have a lot of the local newspapers that you can't really find without like really searching. You can't find a lot of that information on the internet because it was like local newspapers and back in the, the 60s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's super interesting. Of course, they have a local documentary made, different things like that as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of neat stuff going on there. But I've never had any kind of personal experience with Mothman. Like I've not had any kind of visions or anything crazy like that. But
Yeah. The museum is kind of a research library for Mothman, Ninth Pond says.
yeah, it is. I got my T-shirt. I got a bumper sticker. I got my picture taken with the Mothman, all that stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Nice little bit of tourism for that town,
Yeah.
at the very least.
Well, that
Oh,
area in general, it's just not that town, but
Yeah.
yeah, for
right.
sure.
Don't visit at night in your moth suit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
can
can't
confirm.
stress enough. Do not investigate cryptids in costume. You're probably going to get shot. And I'm sorry, but that's kind of on you at that point.
Right.
Right.
Especially rural cryptids. Like, you get back into the backwoods and stuff, like, it's a different world, and the communities are close, tight knit, and usually a little xenophobic, to put it lightly. So, like, if you're
Yeah,
just traipsing through the woods in like a Bigfoot suit, like, you're probably not coming out.
not a good idea. Poor safety choice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and uncomfortable. God. All right, so I think Wicked and I are going to be talking about the same personal favorite cryptid. So before we do that, Rascal, your personal favorite cryptid that you want to talk about?
You know, again, not exactly a cryptid, but this has gone kind of into uh I guess classification of like legendary, creature or it is kind of like, trickled into popular culture. But it's the Wendigo. Uh and for those that don't know, the Wendigo is a kind of a mythological creature stemming from northern Indian tribes in northern Minnesota into Alberta, Canada. Uh, specifically, we're talking about this does go all the way to the Pacific Northwest too, as well. But we're talking, the tribes we're talking about are the people that speak Algonquin. So the Ojibwe, the Saulteaux, the Cree, the Naskapi, and the Innu. Um, all of those tribes. And there's several variations of this. Generally speaking, these always happen at winter, and I'm going to kind of actually give again the supernatural side of it and the more scientific side. So in some instances, these are creatures that are giants. They come like with a snowstorm or a blizzard. They'll kind of be an amalgam style creature where sometimes they're bipedal or they're depicted with very long arms, short legs, some combination thereof. They'll have horns. They might have a bear's head, an elk's head, something like that. Um, but they are always associated with winter and famine, right? And in all these tribes, it was the job of the medicine man to combat like the any of these supernatural creatures or beings. Okay, and there was also, there's also versions of, human Wendigos as well, which are generally described as being like emaciated, feral, um, very pallid, things like that. Um, there is an actual ritual. The last one that was performed allegedly was up in northern Minnesota, and there's a whole dance and that goes along with it. But these go all the way. These go way way back. But some of the first recorded interactions go all the way back to the 1600s and involve a Jesuit priest giving his account of the human version of a Wendigo, which is a woman that was uh, very emaciated, out of her mind, and cannibalistic. She had
Uh-huh.
eaten, I believe, a couple of her family members. And again, this ties into that whole deep winter famine um, kind of narrative. And you know, we're talking again about like northern Minnesota and Canada, where it does get very cold.
Right.
Um, and we are, we have to go back. One of the big famous cases of this is the winter of 1878. Okay. And this takes place around Fort Saskatchewan, which I believe, if I recall correctly, is outside Edmonton, Canada.
I think so.
And yeah, and it involves a man named Swift Runner, who ended up, his son died, his eldest son died, and he ended up butchering and eating the rest of his family. It was like four people all told, his wife and his other children. And they were very, the local community was very distraught over this. Um,
Hmm.
Obviously, as they would be. This guy was Swift Runner was executed at Fort Saskatchewan. He was killed, and people were kind of questioning why he would have done this, especially because the Hudson Bay Company, one of their posts out there, and they would have had emergency food storage for the local area, and he could have gotten it. It's about 25 miles away. And 25 miles, if you're living out in rural Alberta, you know, remember this is not like hopping in your car and driving down the road. Winters can get pretty brutal there. So I started looking, trying to find any sort of information about what the winter would have been like in 1878. Now, I couldn't find anything particularly from Alberta, but I did find things all the way from the Twin Cities in Minnesota, which is, south, but, still relatively close as far as weather goes. And
Hmm.
that was actually considered the winter without winter for like 2 years in a row. It was actually like the warmest winter on record,
Hmm.
believe it or not. It rained a lot, but even into January, it wasn't very cold. Not like what it could be. Absolutely, at that period, you're talking well into the negatives,
Right.
especially back then. But no, this was very much in the positives to where, you know, today you could theoretically, if you had a good logging trail and some good gear, you could make 25 miles if you needed to go and get food or something like that. And certainly, if you had a horse, you could make it almost within a day.
Right.
With a well-traveled trail or road. So, yeah, and of course today we have lots of modern, weather, monitoring stuff. But I felt it was important to kind of like, get that try and find that information when I was researching this. The next one happens in 1907, and it involves a man by the name of Jack Fiddler, who was an Ojibwe chief and medicine man. And this guy was known for fighting Wendigos, right? And remember, this is well over 100 years ago now. But they were also arrested for homicide, for killing a person that was alleged to be a Wendigo, a human Wendigo that
Right.
engaged in cannibalism. Well, this led to something very interesting, and there's actually a phenomenon. It's debated. It is debated, but there are official papers on this, like published papers, and the phenomenon that happens is called Wendigo psychosis. And the strange thing about this is this really only happens to people of that culture, the Algonquin culture
Okay.
in that region. So as it's what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because people are like, well, then more people that live in northern parts of the world should experience this phenomenon, but they don't. It's only happening from this culture, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the people that say, well, yeah, it's going to happen less and less as time progresses because the Algonquin people are becoming, fewer and fewer. You have global trade, you have more food resources, and this always centers around food scarcity, right? And it's
Right.
kind of like an instance almost of like cabin fever. So people sit there and they kind of, you know, wonder what's going on. But like all throughout the oral traditions of the Algonquin, they have these cases of these people going insane, or a spirit has possessed them as they see it, people, and they end up engaging in cannibalism, and eating people, obviously. So it's very, very strange and very macabre uh, situations that this goes but it goes so far back and it keeps on happening. And generally speaking, the only way to deal with this is homicide, is to kill the person. And there was one account of a woman actually being cured, oddly enough, by drinking bear fat.
Hmm.
And as we know, for someone that is incredibly malnourished, again, long winter months, um it was sorry, it wasn't a good harvest. We don't make it through the winter, um, or we didn't store up enough stores. But bear fat is incredibly dense nutrition, you know, uh, in a way to give yourself a big energy boost. So it's interesting that is considered a cure, a cure for being a Wendigo. Um, and Yeah, that's really about it. But very fascinating stuff that this is actually a psychosis, and it really hasn't occurred since. But oddly enough, there are serial killers. That there was that Canadian serial killer that they suspect there's like 42 bodies buried on his property, and he was a cannibal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting as well. That would happen.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to it. I don't know. Um,
Speak on the
yeah,
fat. I don't think a lot of people understand the biological need for what's in fats like that. Um,
yeah.
that
Well, your
like
brain is cholesterol.
yeah,
Yeah,
like but
there's a lot of research done behind why humans got so much more intelligence than our cousins, and a lot of it ties down to fat fat intake. Your brain feeds off of fat.
Yeah.
Like, it's like fat is like brain magic, basically.
Mhm,
right,
mhm.
absolutely. Ninth Pond says years ago I had a friend who was born on a reserve in Ontario. She talked about Wendigo stories and how a lot of the stories stayed on the reserve because the people were kind of insular for the most part. Yeah, you definitely get that insular thing with well anybody out in the middle of nowhere, but also reservations like that, whether it's intended or not. Something that I found interesting about it being psychosis is I always like to find a way where the fantastical and science kind of come together. I fully believe that today's science was the magic of yesteryear. That there is a relationship between magic and science. So I give this possibility, this theory, that The Wendigo condition uh, is spiritual possession in a way, and the way that manifests physically is a mental or chemical imbalance triggering these behaviors, and that certain people seem more predisposed to it, like these certain tribes, and what have you. Back to the magical, maybe that's that spirit cursing those people, and it's reflected that spirit manipulated their genes to have this reaction to their influence. I think it's a cool concept.
Right. And I'll read a description, right, um, real quick. And it reads as follows: The Wendigo was gaunt, point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bone, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, unclean, and suffering from suppuration of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Uh, so the other thing is if you can imagine someone that's schizophrenic or something like that, would have been considered, possessed or something like that, or very, very standoffish from the rest of the tribe. Sometimes, violent. We know that a lot of, like the vast majority of people with mental illness are harmless, right?
Mhm.
They're not going to hurt you. There is that small portion, however, when you start acting funny, the tribe gets a little worried. You know what I'm saying? And the
Right.
tribe can get standoffish towards that person. So that, feeds into this, right? This person
Right.
may run off or whatever, or is in the throes of this mass hormonal imbalance, and their brain chemistry is all kinds of messed up. And you can imagine that if the person has slipped into a deep, form of psychosis, they're not going to be eating a lot in the first place, which is you start getting a little loopy if you don't eat for, a day. Yeah, I
Right.
know I do. um Imagine going 2 days, 3 days, your brain literally does, um like we talked about, starts to literally eat itself and starts to, and over a long period of time with enough malnutrition, you can give yourself brain damage. There's lots of cases of this, especially with child abuse and things like that, to
Mhm.
where like their brain, especially in that developmental phase, isn't given the chance to fully to develop. And even when they do start getting proper care and nutrition, that's it. That gap that the brain had to grow during that time period, done. You don't get that back.
Right.
And I remember studying this case of a small girl that was kept in this room by her mother for years, all the way, I believe, into her teenage years, until the police finally found her, had enough reports, and they basically, took her out of there. But she was something like 13 years old, still wearing a diaper, and she was acting in this completely skittish, feral manner, and fit this description pretty well,
Hmm.
you know. And so yeah, I firmly believe that no matter what, these people did encounter this, and they did probably believe whatever it uh was an evil spirit. I guess you wouldn't really have much of a way to know otherwise, right? If this was happening to you, again, we're talking about northern Canada. This is where the tribe is from.
Right.
If it wasn't a good harvest, food's lean, or what have you, the hunt wasn't good, et cetera, et cetera, outside pressures, whatever they may be, I can see it, and then this would pass into legend and kind of, be more of a boogeyman thing. And again, chicken versus the egg, time of famine, this creature, and it's, again, it's warnings, right? Prepare for that long winter, my friend, because
Mhm.
it's coming.
Yep.
You want to make sure that you're ready, and this is why you need to be.
Right. Ninth Pond says probably why a lot of visions usually happen after fasting, and fasting is done to have visions. Yeah, that has a lot to do with
Yeah.
it.
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, Wendigo. It's a crazy one. It's it's to me more daunting than some cryptids because it's something that would just happen to a person. It's not. This is something hiding in the bushes. This isn't something hiding in the woods or something. This is something that could happen to just to a person that's in the wrong set of circumstances.
Right. And did happen.
Right. Exactly.
You know, we have actual accounts of this.
Yeah. Whether or not it's supernatural, that's up to debate. But there are people who this happened to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that's why it's very interesting. And again, the even the psychological aspect of it. There are papers on this, and you can read them. They're published, and it is very it's interesting stuff. And I would urge you to go and look at it. And it does shed an interesting light on the history of how we dealt as a people and how we are dealing with mental illness overall.
Absolutely. A much broader conversation could be had from it for sure. So, Wicked, any more
Now
thoughts
the
on Wendigo?
No, I think you pretty much covered.
What were you saying, Rascal?
No, I was just gonna say like let's get to the main course, so to speak.
The Bigfoot,
Yeah.
Sasquatch,
Bigfoot,
the
Ohio
the beast of many
Grassman.
names, Ohio Grassman, the Skunk Ape, like so many different names
Yeah.
for the
The
Bigfoot,
abominable snowman.
right? Oh man, so many names, and the Yeti might be a Bigfoot too. Like, I mean, come on, there's so many names for the idea of the Bigfoot. Uh, I think just about every state has Bigfoot stories, in
Yeah,
one way or
100%.
another. They're the only, and I could be completely wrong. Like, pretty much as Europe is the only place I don't hear much about a Bigfoot like being. Um, yeah, because I've heard about stuff in Asia, throughout Asia, mainly though in uh, was it Nepal? There's Yeti stuff.
Yeah, the
Um,
Himalayas.
right, Himalayans, Russia. I've heard about similar creatures in Africa. Um, Australia as well. I don't think I've necessarily heard of it. No, I did. I did hear about something in Australia as well.
They call it the wild man in Australia.
Yeah,
They're Aborigines.
right. So just about everywhere except for Europe, and I'd love to hear that I'm wrong about that. You found Bigfoot. He's on your screen. Nice guess. There's a Progressive commercial recently that makes me laugh where Flo calls him Bigfoot and he looks down at his feet and says, offendedly, "My name is Daryl."
Mm.
Nice. Um, so the Bigfoot, a lot of people, there's a lot of different school thoughts of what Bigfoot is. Some say he's the missing link in evolution for us. Some say that he's just another kind of ape. Some say he's its own thing entirely. I think the other ape idea, the missing link, is Gigantopithecus, which went extinct after humans were already civilizing, but still extinct. So scientists say is an interesting idea. They're apparently a very very smart great ape, um, and that was mainly in Asia, I think, is where Gigantopithecus was. Um, and then there's the ideas of it's more of a spiritual thing. Um, so there's a lot of different schools of thought, so to speak. There's a lot of people who say they are Bigfoot experts somehow, which I always find interesting since it's not a proven thing that somebody can say, I'm an expert. Bigfoots do this, they eat this, they act like this, as if it's absolute 100% fact. Um, uh, so my idea of Bigfoot um, is definitely more towards the physical or the metaphysical, the spiritual. Um, personally, um, but it I wouldn't I wouldn't be shocked if somebody someday found an actual physical ape species.
Body, right?
Um, I just don't know that that's what it is. Just because, unless it was very sentient, like we were saying before, and could specifically think, okay, be, we cannot be discovered because humans will kill us, so we have to hide. If it's not that, I don't put a lot of faith in the fact in it being like a different breed of gorilla or whatever. I think it would have been found by now if it wasn't that. So we can dig in deeper after we all kind of say our idea of what it could be. So, Wicked, I think you're in a similar position as me, thinking it's more
Yeah,
spiritual.
I think it's metaphysical. I think in it's interdimensional. It's
Yeah.
spiritual. I would be really surprised if one day science put a Bigfoot on the slab. Like that would be shocking to me if that happened. I would, you know, I would be all right with that happening other than obviously they have to kill it, which I don't want to happen. But maybe they find one that's already deceased or something cool like that. But I would be thoroughly surprised if that ever happened because man, I've been in the backwoods of Kentucky. I lived in Kentucky for 5 years, and these dudes, when and I don't want to like stereotype people, but when the people that I was around where I lived, when they wanted to get something, man, they got it. And a lot of them wanted Bigfoot, and they never got it. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Hmm.
I think that particular group of people, when they put their mind to something, like it happens,
Absolutely.
and they never got a Bigfoot.
Well, we'll put a marker on your time in Kentucky too for some personal experience stories here in a few. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I can definitely see
Oh
that.
yeah.
What do you think, Rascal?
Okay. You see these sightings or whatever. We know now that a lot of there's that very famous footage, that the 8 millimeter footage. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh yeah.
The Patterson films.
Yeah, the Patterson films. Yeah, we know those are bunk. Um,
Mm,
yeah, they're bunk. Um, Guy came out years ago and copped to it, and it they they are still very very good. And to me, like, Kentucky is a non-starter for a physical specimen. I'm with Wigan on that. I don't think that's happening. Um, if you want to go to like some very remote areas, like interior Alaska or even the Pacific Northwest, in the Cascades, um, there's the story of Ape Canyon, um, where a bunch of miners were holed up, in a cabin, um, and they were supposedly assailed by a bunch of apes, and I would call them probably Sasquatch or Bigfoots. A tribe of them effectively hurling rocks and stones down this cabin, etc. And I actually found out there was actually recently I guess a research team that went out there and tried to find the remnants of that cabin, and they were successful. And they found like the foundation and uh, some cookware and stuff like that. So it definitely was there. And this was reported, I believe, in like local newspapers and stuff like that. So I mean, for me, a physical specimen is not going to come out of the lower 50. It's not. Like, it's going to have to come out of the Pacific Northwest, interior Alaska, Canada, something like that. Nepal and the Himalaya mountains. Again, also very remote, but becoming less and less so because everyone and their brothers trying to summit Mount Everest and just walk up there, and there's a whole train of people, and people die of, what was that? Was it hypoxia?
Yeah.
So often there's like a trail of bodies where the Nepalese government recently had to go up there and literally get rid of all the bodies and trash.
Yeah.
So the more and more people that we have in an area, the less and less likely it is for this thing to be a physical manifestation, uh in my eyes. So if But again, a lot of these civilizations and stuff like that have these stories that have a lot of parallels, and it gets you thinking. And for me, I start wondering, because we pass stuff down orally first
Mhm.
before we wrote it down, right?
Yep.
And you have to think how far back that went, and if for me, if it's conceivable, right? Like, that there were human tribes that were communicating in one fashion or another, and they saw something like Gigantolopithecus, you know, how is it possible that's the story that they're telling, that it's just been, told in one iteration or another, for that long? I wonder about that. Is that a possibility? I don't know. I mean, is it a possibility? Absolutely. But is that the case?
Right.
I don't know. I'm unconvinced. Um, and as much as I would be like, I want to say like, yeah, it's, there's a strong possibility that we get a physical specimen. The more and more time goes on, the less and less likely it's,
Right.
So
Right. That makes sense. It's also compelling, the idea of, do all the stories we know have a common thread in an experience thousands of years ago? That's an interesting concept to me. Um, Ninth Pond says they haven't been caught. Also implies to me that these creatures are able to cover their tracks, which is interesting in of itself. Yeah, that plays into my thought of, they'd have to be pretty sentient to be physical beings and not be caught by now. Um, so yeah, I do lean towards it being spiritual. As far as Kentucky though, there's parts of the mountains of Kentucky that are just as isolated as parts like way up north or what have you, just because you can't get to them well. And there's no reason for people to go there. It's not a famous place like Mount Everest. They're just really difficult to almost impossible during a certain time of year places to get. Even the places where some people live in Kentucky are, I don't know why anybody built there. I don't know why they're living there.
They
Um,
don't like people.
that I can understand, but like when my one of my personal experiences that I'm going to bring up um, was when Wicked Tricks was living down there, up in the mountains. I went and visited him, and it there was uh, an ice storm that went through on the lower part of the mountain, and I couldn't leave for a week. Like, it's a crazy place, the mountains of Kentucky. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some species of animals that still haven't been discovered that'll one day be brought down out of those mountains. Is all I'm saying there. So, would you agree with that, Joseph? Or
Oh,
Wicked?
100%. 100%.
So, my personal
1000%.
experience, my personal experience is it happened there on that chunk of mountain where Wicked Tricks was living. Um, and he lived. I don't want to give too much of it away. There's still people that live right around there. Not that anybody would really know them or whatever, but it's up in the mountains, and the little section where he was at, there's a family that lived there, and there's a couple of trailers and some horse stalls, and the closest little town was very, very small. Like, we're talking, there was a gas station that had a Subway, There was one restaurant that was only open for part of the day, and there was a little grocery store. That was about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it was a speck. And he didn't even live in that town. He was up and away from that town. But the I think it was like the second night I was there. Wicked was working down in town. It was nighttime. It was wintry. Um, and in the trailer, I was sitting in the trailer with everybody in there. Um, and I heard something walk up on the porch, um, which was odd. Um, so I looked out the door, and I didn't. There's a little window in the door, and I didn't see anything. So I went back, and then I heard something around the front windows, like tapping on the window. So I went to the window, and there was nothing at the window. I'm like, okay. Then I heard it at the door again, and when I went to the door, it looked like I saw something reaching down from the door. Um, so I went and got it was actually my brother-in-law's shotgun, just a single shot, 12 gauge shotgun, and went to open the door, and nobody was around at all. Um, there was mushed down snow everywhere. There's no boot prints, no shoe prints. There's definitely mushed down like something was walking around, and um, it looked kind of like walking coming from the horse stalls and then back around the woods. It was dark, it was night, it was unfamiliar territory, so I didn't track it back further than the light would carry, but it definitely didn't come from any of the other trailers. It definitely wasn't boot prints. The next day, I could see in the stalls, and Wicked later told me that it looked like something was bedding in the stalls. It was definitely bits of hair and stuff. But it it wasn't a person. I know it wasn't a person, but I don't know what it was. My gut and my brain immediately went to Bigfoot, to Sasquatch. Bear, maybe, but bears don't usually just tap on stuff. You know what I mean? They try to get in.
They're pretty loud.
Right,
They make themselves like very well. Like, I'm a bear. I'm here.
right. Ninth Pond says, I had a cabin in the North Georgia woods, and while it may have built up by now, back then people in the area thought nothing of having to drive 40 plus miles to get to Walmart, because it was the only place around. The nearest Walmart to us wasn't even in Georgia, it was in North Carolina. Damn, yeah, that's pretty secluded. It was a big nope, that's right. At the very least, it was a big nope. So I found that to be compelling. Is there proof in that story? Absolutely not. Did I physically see it? No. Um, but I'm confident that it wasn't a person. I'm confident it wasn't a bear. So it keeps me interested. It keeps me excited. There's various times I've gone hiking where I swear I saw some big bipedal something, but I can't tell you that I saw it. That's why I always say that I believe in the idea of Bigfoot. I want him to exist. It's awesome, but I can't tell you yes, Bigfoot exists. Um, Other stories are what makes me think it's spiritual. A lot of Native American stories, like that this could be an extra dimensional being, a spirit that comes and go and interacts in our natural world, has a place in that order. Uh, that I think is the likely truth, and I haven't seen anything to dissuade me from that. So that's my experiences on Bigfoot. You got anything wicked?
Uh, my first experience with what I think Bigfoot gets, and I'm gonna like let you guys know ahead of time. It gets really weird. Um,
We're in the weird.
I was weird as in the fact that it I tied in with a UFO.
Awesome.
Okay, it gets really strange. I was 17. My grandparents owned some property, several acres, like I don't know, 60 acres or so. And there was the place where I live. It's called the Kyotas. It's an abandoned coal mine where they did the hill strip mining procedure where they didn't dig into the earth. They just lopped off the top of the mountain or top of the hill
Mm-hmm.
and got the coal. Strip mining is what they call it.
Yep.
And this area was the remnants of that from, I believe, the 50s. And it's a really nice area. It's reforested. There's a lot of fresh forest there. There's quite a few of really nice leftover mining ponds that are really clean, that are full of panfish and beavers and all kinds of really nice stuff. I spent the better part of 10 years growing up in these woods. Like I went there every weekend, pretty much every weekend for the time I was 7 to the time I was like 20, 22, 23, something like that. And I spent countless hours in these woods. And I knew them. I knew where every pond was. I knew where every hill was. I knew where every grapevine was. I knew where every mushroom spot was. Like I knew where all the sassafras was. I knew where all the ginseng was. Like I knew this place absolutely, unequivocally like the back of my hand. Like I can't explain to you how well I knew this area. And we had a particular camping spot. Hold on just a second. I had this one particular camping spot that we used hundreds of times over a 10-year period, like hundreds and hundreds of times. It was situated in between two really big beaver ponds, far enough away from the ponds where the beavers wouldn't bother you. And by the way, beavers can be very nasty, vile creatures. Just letting you know that right now.
Just
Okay.
put that out there.
They are very aggressive. But anyway, um, and we had it set up. We had a fire pit. We had places where the ground was clean and dry so you could put our tents on it. Like we'd used it, like I said, hundreds of times. Now, this particular night, um, we planned to have a. I was with a group of people, my ex girlfriend at the time, a couple of my really close friends. There was 5 of us, and we had camped in this spot so many different times. And we schooled that out on Friday. We packed up the van and we headed out. We had the all the equipment, camping gear and stuff. And just also to say, there's no alcohol involved in this trip. Nobody was drinking. There was no drugs. Nobody was doing anything, right?
Mhm.
And we got out. We got out late. It was starting to get dark, so I got the tents up. We got a campfire set up, and we were gonna cook what I call a top hat meal, where I dig a hole in the ground, I put the coals down in the ground, and then I cook a big chunk of meat. You put it in that night. When you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning, it's done, right?
Right.
So I was preparing the pit for this, and I had this overwhelming smell. It smelled like it smelled like death. Like it was rotten, like so in your nose, like there's no mistaking it. It's like disgusting, makes your stomach hurt, like rot, right?
Mhm.
And I got a whiff of it. It wasn't like constant, right? I just got a small whiff of it. And I was like, well, maybe there's a deer dead close to the camp or whatever. And I kind of stopped what I was doing and I walked around the perimeter of the camp, couldn't find anything, and I didn't smell it anymore. So I was like, okay, well, whatever. I got to finish what I'm doing. And the other people had set up the tents, and we had our lounge chairs out. We had the s'mores ready and stuff. We were gonna snack. And I smelled it again, and then I asked everybody else. I was like, "Hey, do you guys smell that?" And they're like, "Yeah, what is that?" I was like, "I bet you there's something dead, near here." So we all of us walked around, pretty big perimeter. I'd say 30, maybe 40 yards around. We couldn't find anything,
Mhm.
and I thought, okay, so I'll get up in the morning when it's daylight, because this time it was almost completely dark out.
Yeah.
And we sat around the campfire. Nothing else happened. We just chatted, told stories, whatever, ate our s'mores, and then we went to bed. And at the time, I don't remember this happening. This I recalled after. Okay, just a little pre-nomer. We woke up the next morning like, normal. We walked around. Uh, we looked for things for the smell. We looked for carcass or different things along that lines, and we didn't find anything, nothing. And we had planned that day to go up to the Kyotos, up to the pond, and this was the middle of summer, right? And
Hmm.
we're gonna go see if the beavers were in this one pond. If there were no beavers in this pond, we're going swimming. For the record, if there are beavers in a pond, do not swim in that pond. Personal experience, life learning lesson, right? Don't do it. Um, and we went up there and we were looking around and there was no sign of any beaver anywhere. It was looking like, we're going to be able to go swimming. And we're sitting there and we're all getting into our swimsuits or whatever. And then I hear this, how do I explain it? I don't want to say growl, but I also don't want to say scream. And you know how sometimes lions have that subsonic roar where you don't hear it, you feel it?
Yes.
It was like that. I didn't hear anything, but I felt it.
Ultrasound. It's
And I'm
crazy.
ultrasound, right, right. It was fucking insane. I'm like, what what's happening? And all of us at the exact same time, it hit all of us because we're all pretty close to each other, right?
Hmm.
And we're like, and my immediate thought is bear. And where I live in Ohio, like the biggest bear I've ever seen was they're just smaller young black bears, right?
Right.
And they're not very big at that point in time, and they're not really aggressive. They're really skittish. There are no like grizzly bears or anything crazy like that where I live. And we're all like, okay, what the hell is this? And then after we had that subsonic hit or whatever you want to call it, we smelled the smell again. The raunchy, the stink, like death. And we all started getting a little freaked out. And I was like, come on, let's just go back to camp. And we went back to camp, and it was a good 10-15 minute hike back to our campsite. No more experiences. We didn't smell it again. We didn't have any of the subsonic things. We didn't hear anything. And we're sitting back at camp and we're like, you know, what the fuck was that? And we were kind of paranoid at that point in time. So we built what I call perimeter fires. Well, like a couple of smaller fires around our campsite, and I kept them going all night. And we just stayed in the campsite because we were all legitimately scared. Like we were actually scared, and nothing happened that night. We stayed up pretty late. I remember staying up till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, till like almost to the point where you could see, the sun coming back up. And finally, I dozed off. And then we woke up the next day. It was Sunday by then. We packed up, we got everything packed up, and we got the hell out of Dodge. And that alone is a pretty interesting story. But what happened was later, months later, I started talking to my friend Joel, and he was one of the ones with us. And he's like, "Do you remember having that dream?" And I'm like, "No, what dream?" He's like, "Well, I remember when we had that particular camping event and I was asleep in my tent, I saw three lights above the tent and I felt like I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, right?" And at the time I was like, "No, that doesn't ring a bell. Like I didn't have that dream, right? That wasn't part of my experience or whatever you want to call it." And I would have left it at that. But then years later, I'm talking years later, like 10, 15 years later, my ex at the time, Tony, was like, "Hey, do you remember that trip?" And I was like, "Yeah." She said, "We went out to the pond." I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Did you have this dream?" And I was like, "No." But that's funny because Joel said he had the dream. And they both had a similar dream of where they were laying in the tent face up and they were paralyzed and there were three glowing lights above the tent. And the reason I connected the two stories together was because of the description of the night, the tent that we were in, the different things. And then I went and I got my friend Eli, and I'm like, Eli, did you have this fucking dream? He's like, yeah, dude, I had that dream. So I finally got us all together 10 years later, and I'm like, all right, we need to hash this shit out. So we sat down and we were talking about this story, this camping trip that we have, and they all had the same experience. So I was thinking, why didn't I have that experience, right? I had almost all the other experiences, but I didn't have the sleep para the where I was
Paralysis.
paralyzed in my sleep, and I don't recall seeing the lights.
Hmm.
Well, I think it was because they say in their dreams I wasn't in the tent. None of them recall me being. We all slept in this great big huge military style folding tent. Like there was 5 people, one tent, huge tent, right? And they're all like, "Well, in our dream, you weren't there." So, you know,
When
I
you
I
fell,
I don't know
when you
what.
fell asleep, were you the last one to fall asleep?
Yes, absolutely,
So,
positively,
so perhaps
last one to
whatever
fall asleep.
event occurred before you were asleep.
It's possible. It's possible.
Like I'm saying, and this goes into uh extra dimensional kind of stuff, like spirit realm kind of deal. But I could imagine that being um a shared experience because they were asleep and you were not. Like whatever it was tapping into their dream, so to speak, and it became a shared experience. That's what kind of makes sense to me.
All right, but here's the thing with full circle, right?
Uh huh.
Years later, after we all sit down and we had this conversation, they'd each done their own research and discussed it and had other experiences, right?
Okay.
And a lot of it, my buddy Eli, he went into the Marines, and he said that his experience was of seeing Bigfoot and during that event. And he was the only one of us that physically saw a creature, right? If
Right.
you want to call it Bigfoot, he called it Bigfoot, right? I didn't see it. I can't say, you know, whatever. But he also said that in his experience afterwards, he felt like it had attached to him, and that throughout his young adult life and his early military career, he would see this being periodically off and on at random times. So, you talk about the spiritual part of it or whatever, right?
Hmm.
I never had any experiences like that, like ever. That wasn't outside that one experience. I've never had a physical interaction. Like when I had that subsonic, I believe that's the only physical interaction I've ever had with what I would consider a Bigfoot, right?
Right.
Um,
Real quick to explain to chat, the ultrasonic stuff. It's a sound that a lot of big cats can make and other large animals. That the actual sound is inaudible to us, although it can be layered upon audible sound. But it causes a reaction in the human body. Sometimes it induces paralysis. Definitely induces anxiety, and it can shut us down. This intense ultrasound.
yeah, and
Just
there's
explain that real
animals
quick.
that use it to stun their prey and stuff too. Like there's plenty of evidence that, what it is. But what adds a little craziness to this story is years later, we're talking 20 years later, I started doing my own research after I had a UFO experience. And I don't want to get off on UFOs, that's another discussion. But I had an extreme UFO experience in Kentucky, right? And in that research, I started seeing parallels with my experience in the woods when I was 17. And
Interesting.
it's how they say you go down that rabbit hole, right? I went into all this people that, okay, it's so weird that people all over the United States have a super similar experience to what I have, almost to the T.
Hmm.
People I don't know, people I'm not connected to, not even the same geographical location have the same experiences. Now, why is that? Like, there's a whole rabbit hole there, right?
Right.
So, that was my only physical
Synchronicity.
experience with Bigfoot. And it seems really unique to me in the fact that it's much time that I have spent in the wilderness by myself. Like I've never had another experience like it. So it's really unique to me.
Right. That is interesting. I haven't heard anything quite like that. To catch chat up, Ninth Pond says, when I lived in Tallahassee, I helped a friend track a hunting dog that ran off the uh, Apalachicola National Forest. I hope I said that right. The whole time we were out there, it felt like something was watching us hard. Didn't see anything, but other people out there felt it too, and it was driving the dogs nuts. I've had similar experiences. The whole sensation of being watching and animals going a little crazy. But Matcha says, but beaver anus makes sweet, sweet vanillin. Oh yeah, that's true. But I'm still not going to eat a beaver ass. Gasol says beer farts. Ninth Pond agrees that beavers are nasty, aggressive creatures. The
They are
computer
very nasty,
virus,
yes.
in regards, I think, to the sound you're trying to describe, said sounds like Wendigo. Um, um, and we were talking about Wendigo earlier, computer virus. If you didn't catch it, you should definitely check out the VOD. We had a lot of cool stuff to say about the Wendigo, and yeah, just the sound itself. Like I could definitely go Wendigo. Of course, the other contexts have told us otherwise, since you were able to post that. But yeah, ultrasound, guys, look up ultrasound. It's a really interesting phenomenon.
And something I
Um,
want to tie up into that story before I forget, Exarkin,
uh-huh.
is later on in my research that I found similar reports of what I experienced back when I was 17 in this area. There's a lot of reports, which is crazy. And what I mean
Interesting.
by similarities is people having events where they experience a Bigfoot type sighting and it's directly tied into a UFO sighting almost simultaneously.
Okay, so like lights in the sky kind of UFO sightings.
Yeah, we see lights and then we experience Bigfoot, or we experience Bigfoot and then we see lights. Like there's two type of events, right?
Right.
But yeah, that similar thing.
So that makes me again think more of the spiritual. But wouldn't it be interesting if Bigfoot was an alien?
God.
another rabbit hole to go down. Rascal, have you had any actual personal cryptid experiences you want to share?
Nothing I can, nothing I can put definitively put my finger on. Um, I've seen a pretty large swath of North America and spent a lot of time camping, um, and things like that. And there's stuff I just can't put I can't even begin to explain, and nor could I really begin to tie it into a lot of these things, like, especially like Bigfoot or whatever. But I've had a lot of feelings, and I think that we've all had at one time or another that feeling like we are being actively watched by something. Not like, and I'm not talking about Big Brother, listening in on your conversations or anything like that. But again, it goes back to that very primal feeling of being out in nature where you're just kind of like, hmm. And we do know that whole like that third eye concept of people know when they're being watched. Like, and the hair stands up on the back of your neck, and it's not one of those things where that because that's a natural defense mechanism. And I've been out in the woods in a great many places, or out in the more wild areas of America and things like that, and I have been painfully aware of that feeling. I grew up hiking in the foothills and mountains of California, uh, where there were mountain lion sightings and stuff like that. And you become aware of when you're being watched, and it's like I don't really think about it because I was never thinking about like supernatural stuff, but you kind of start like you'll just kind of be minding your own business or in your own headspace, and you'll be walking along, and then every once in a while I would just like kind of stop, and I would just get that you get that feeling. You're out in the middle of nowhere, you're alone. There's no other there can't be any possibly any other vehicles. There's no one else on foot. You're in the middle of a national forest, and you just stop, and you do, and you just kind of go, What is that? What is that that I'm being like?" And I would start looking around. I've had this feeling several times where it's like, okay, like I know I'm being watched, but it's just a question of by what.
Right.
And I would love to spend more time up in the Cascades and stuff like that, and dive kind of deeper into this, but yeah, I'm not willing to discount anything, but like as far as like firsthand, like weird things, or creatures, nothing that I don't think is that I can't explain. Nothing like that. Just more of a feeling of like a presence, if that's what you want to call it,
Right.
overall.
Gotcha. Yeah, that feeling of being watched, or sometimes it's so intense that it almost feels like you're being hunted. Is something that I don't know. It makes me when it kicks in, I'm like, is this real? Am I being paranoid? Like it really does a number on me sometimes. But it's something that I think is pretty instinctual. It's pretty ingrained in a lot of people, and only people who are so fully removed from any kind of actual danger in their lives. I think they're the only one that lose that. I think the rest of us have that deeply ingrained. Really interesting concept. The Force, man. So, there's a billion other cryptids out there, um, from a lot of places. Uh, really interesting, really crazy off the wall ones, like in Loveland, Ohio, the Frogman. It's like a 4 foot tall creature from the Black Lagoon kind of thing. Um, there's apparently a horse-sized octopus in Oklahoma that people talk about. Like, there's some really crazy, out the wall, interesting stuff out there for people to look at if you're into cryptids. I'm gonna share one last real quick interesting Sasquatch story that I heard on a podcast that I really enjoy, and I think you guys should check out, called Monsters Among Us. It's a call-in show. People will leave their experiences with cryptids and stuff in a message, and the host, Derek Hayes, will play them on air and then discuss them briefly. But one of them was an interesting one, um, about a guy, a hunter, in I believe the southern United States. I could be wrong there, but definitely in the U.S. That was up in a tree stand. He fell and hit a bunch of branches on the way down. He had broken or really damaged his back, and he was laying helpless in a bough of a tree. And to cut to the chase, he says what he thinks describes as perhaps a female Bigfoot comes and pulls him out of the tree gently, and forces him to drink her breast milk, which he described as being nasty and gross. And another larger creature like Bigfoot was yelling at her, or grunting at her, and she eventually just set him down on the ground, and they both left. And later, his friends who knew where he was hunting went and helped him and got him to the hospital. And an update to the story says that he healed incredibly fast. So I don't know if I believe the story, but I find it to be a very interesting story as far as Bigfoot stories go. And if it is a spiritual creature, then maybe he was given aid, and maybe that's something really interesting.
Yeah.
But otherwise, Bigfoot breast milk, I'm gonna have to pass.
I think that science needs to embrace the healing powers of the Sasquatch booby milk. That's what needs to happen.
Man,
I
that would be
Reddit would
so.
have a field day with that.
If imagine if you would that the Bigfoot are real physical creatures, and that their breast milk did have incredible healing factors. How fucked are they as a species?
Yeah. Yeah. You're already incredibly rare, and then it turns out that like you're also incredibly useful,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. Oh
Man.
boy. Here we go. I can just see the Rule 34
Oh,
Squatch
oh,
art coming out now.
oh
Eesh.
no. Oh
Oh
no.
lordy. Oh.
So yeah, basically, there's a lot of cryptids out there, and I think there's enough for us to have another one of these particular topics, maybe a few more down the road. And I hope you guys enjoyed this format. I think the next one we're gonna do, it'll either be ghosts or UFOs, and down the line, I definitely want to do a conspiracy conversation. So hopefully these guys will join me again. Hopefully you guys are into this. If you guys like this podcast type setup, if you're interested in these topics and you're enjoying yourself, please make sure we know. That's the only way I know to keep doing a thing, is if you tell me you like it. Before we leave, do you guys have anything else you want to add, or any personal plugs, or anything you want to say?
I will say that I could discuss longer at another time about different experiences I had while I lived in Kentucky. Some of them are definitely Sasquatchy, if that's a word, Sasquatchy.
Squatchy. It's real squatchy.
Squatch. They call it squatching now. That's a
Yeah.
thing.
Um,
But yeah, there's a lot more discussion to be had. I had a this was fun. I enjoyed this. Appreciate it.
yeah,
Rascal and Xarkin. It was a good time.
yeah, the UFOs and like the ghost stuff is a little more my forte. Um, and I've got plenty of stories about that stuff. Um, but yeah, that's really about it.
Nice. Well, I had a blast. This was fantastic. I love this. I love talking with people who love talking about a subject, and I love interacting with you, chat, while we're doing it. This was really fun for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Again, let us know. Definitely hit me up in the Discord. About what you're enjoying, and we'll come back to this. We'll hit this up. I'm gonna see if there's anybody we can raid real quick. Yes, we're gonna raid Russ Eladak playing some Warframe. I'll let you guys know when the next podcast, streamcast, whatever you want to call this is going to be, and what the topic's going to be. Definitely hit us up with suggestions, because that'll be fun. So we're going to go ahead and raid. Please go on with the raid. Let them know it's an X-Pac raid. Give them all the love that you've given me and these guys today, and make their day bright. Thanks for hanging out, guys. I will catch you on Wednesday. All right.